April the 22nd, a sombre day on which football remembers the Hillsborough dead and begins to think seriously about the safety and comfort of its supporters. For a century, soccer fans have been little more than turnstile fodder. Now at last, they are important. But here on Tyneside, the emergence of fan power is nothing new. Tired of watching mediocre football on wet, windswept terraces, and of a board of directors that, in their view, didn't seem to care, the Geordie faithful went into open revolt last autumn, turning one of Britain's most famous clubs into Newcastle Dis United.
We passionately, everyone in this pub and everyone in this town, passionately wants the town, Newcastle, to succeed.
Well,
and I don't think those blokes do. I don't think those blokes have got any passion whatsoever.
Outside Newcastle's ground, in the Strawberry pub, amid the brown ale and the crisp packets, soccer's best-known fan, Rogan Taylor, is recruiting members for his Football Supporters Association. He wants the game to pay greater heed to its customers, and since the Hillsborough disaster, the message is getting through.
I'm afraid, you know, we have an inheritance, don't we, in football, of a business that was born in the brewery boardroom and has been run like a 19th century Victorian brewery for the last 100 years. You stick the beer on the shelf and the punters take it or leave it, and that's consumer relations. Those days are over. Most clubs are beginning to realise that that's the case, and therein, I think, lies the future of the game, in the sense that we're dragging it into the 20th century just in time for the 21st century.
Okay, there's one today, we've got to get this one today, there's no second chance. No second chance.
Inside the ground today is what matters. Unless they win against Luton, Newcastle are almost bound to be relegated. Jim Smith is Newcastle's third manager this season.
This is the one, boys. This is the one we've got to win today. No mistakes today, it's our last chance.
Most of the team have changed too. Only their position at the foot of the First Division has remained unaltered.
It's my sweet. Good lad.
There have also been boardroom changes, but Newcastle's chairman is still around, although his life has been threatened on more than one occasion. Football is a passionate game. It brings out the best and the worst in people, particularly on Tyneside, where the fans have been starved of success. To bring an end to their misery, a millionaire offered to buy the club and to democratise it by issuing shares to the supporters.
Scampering away with the ball, snaps again. It's Michael O'Neill. Newcastle still keep it moving. They play the ball through the gap looking for Hendry.
But the club's would-be saviour has to stay at home, listening to the radio, in case his presence at the game provokes a riot.
And once again, nerve and anxiety at the back as defenders not finding the goalkeeper.
Boardroom battles are nothing new in football. Attempts to take over and so on are commonplace. What is interesting about this battle is that it's the supporter enfranchisement, the supporter democratisation, which has been hoisted from the lowest rungs of the ladder to the top of it as the thing which is being argued over. And I think that here in Newcastle, with its very special circumstances and its enormous grassroots support, even in very tough times in terms of winning things, they can still draw on a massive number of people. I think we're seeing the kind of developments that we may see in other places all over the country. I think they're leading the way in that sense.
Where else but on Tyneside would thousands of people turn out to pay their last respects to a footballer who hung up his boots 30 years ago? But for those who watched it on a cold October day, Jackie Milburn's funeral brought memories flooding back. Memories of Newcastle's golden era, when a Wembley final was almost an annual outing. 1951 was Ward Jackie's year.
And he backheels it to Milburn and shoots, and it's a goal, a terrific goal!
His blistering shot destroyed Blackpool. In 1952, United were back again to play the London aristocrats Arsenal.
He sent it to George Oblida, who headed the goal of the match.
For the second year in succession, Joe Harvey received the victor's prize. In 1955, it was Jimmy Schooler's turn. But this was to be Newcastle's last domestic trophy, and what followed were the locust years of relegation. Hope was rekindled in the 80s when Kevin Keegan appeared in Newcastle's colours. He was the new messiah who would lead the Geordies out of the second division. Urged on by 30,000 adoring fans, Keegan fought to make the prophecy come true.
Keegan, Beardsley, wobble! It's hit the post and Keegan! He's done it! Courtesy of the upright.
Keegan brought the best out of the players around him, and the goals kept on going in.
Comes again to Keegan. And a fine cross to Wobble! Oh, yes!
If Chris Waddle was now a star, then so too was Peter Beardsley. There was genius on the park.
Keegan, and Beardsley again, and Beardsley still. Oh, magnificent! Kevin Keegan would have been proud of that one himself.
In 1984, United won promotion, and Keegan retired in a blaze of glory. But instead of building ambitiously on the foundations Keegan had laid, the club sold irreplaceable players like Waddle and Beardsley. Newcastle's directors said they'd fought to keep Beardsley, but that was not how he saw it.
I'm disappointed that they made out that they tried to keep me. You know, they never made an effort, really. They said that they offered me a new contract and all that. You know, they offered me so much more money or whatever. The truth is, they never offered me a new contract with any money. They said, we'd like to offer you a contract, but they never actually got around to discussing money.
The truth was that Newcastle needed the Beardsley transfer fee to help pay for enforced ground improvements. A new West Stand had to be erected after the previous wooden structure had been condemned as a fire risk. This mid-season construction programme annoyed almost everyone, including the grounds owners, Newcastle City Council, who'd been seeking a planned redevelopment of St James's Park since the early 60s.
For 30 years, the City Council, as owners of the ground, have tried to get the club to carry out its obligations to improve it and maintain it in the interests of supporters and of the city as a whole. And they've been years of dithering and delay and lack of progress.
Why do you think that is?
I think it's partly because the club is run by a relative handful of people, basically in the interests of themselves as directors and shareholders, and frankly with little regard, insufficient regard, for one of the most loyal bands of supporters in the country.
Football clubs always need solicitors, and McKeegan Co. are as inextricably linked with Newcastle United as they are with the social life of the city. Gordon McKeague succeeded his father on the board and is now the chairman. Running the club is a family duty.
I have always been interested in and fascinated with Newcastle United. My first recollection of coming to St James's Park was when I was about 7 or 8 years old, and subsequently whenever I could come, I came to watch matches. And I played a lot of sport myself. I played rugby for 25 years, and I played for the county and that sort of thing. And if you're sports-orientated and live in Newcastle, then Newcastle United is an interest. I passionately want Newcastle United to do well, both as a football club and for the city.
Where they have done well is with their bankers, who financed the new £5 million West Stand on a long-term loan.
It is a very considerable achievement and a credit to our housekeeping that we have been able to build the new West Stand without a resort to outside borrowing.
Whether the books balance or not, 30,000 Newcastle United supporters don't go along to look at the annual accounts. They go along to see a winning football side. They haven't had that, and it's about time they did.
What they did have last year was Paul Gascoigne, one of the game's great entertainers. Gazza was the darling of the crowd, a Geordie youngster around whom Newcastle could have built a team. But in the close season, they sold him to Spurs.
They didn't keep Paul Gascoigne, but in the players they should have kept and built on top of it. They readily let them go and then used that money to recycle on other players. You don't build successful sides by letting your good players go. Liverpool don't do that. Newcastle United do that.
Having sold 3 of their best players, Newcastle built a new team on the proceeds. The side looked good on paper and hopes ran high on Tyneside. Hopes that were dashed after 34 seconds. that was how long it took Everton to score against Newcastle in the opening game of the season. And worse was to follow. Defeat piled upon defeat as Newcastle sank to the bottom of the First Division. The fans were frustrated, the manager was sacked, a replacement couldn't be found, and the team kept on losing. Watching them play had become more of a punishment than a pleasure. We Shall Not Be Moved took on a new meaning, with sit-ins at the Gallowgate end. Parrots were becoming very sick on Tyneside. In the old Gallowgate pubs, football is the main topic of conversation. Geordies argue endlessly about the game, but with their team at the bottom of the league, they were now crying in their beer.
Well, on the resources of the club, we shouldn't be in that position. We should be up there on the resources of the club.
Any team that has, in the last 2 years, developed players of the calibre of Beardsley, Waddle and Gascoigne does not deserve to be at the bottom of the First Division. The fact is that all those players have been sold, because the club has to sell players in order to survive. That's what's causing the anger.
How much of a say do you think supporters should have? For instance, you wouldn't tell Marks and Spencer's how to sell their merchandise, or you wouldn't actually tell Newcastle breweries how to make their beer.
Indirectly we would if we didn't drink it. We're the consumers. We should have a say in it. What other market do you know where they don't do any market research? What other product do you go to a supermarket? And the supermarket looked after its customers. At football, it doesn't happen. They couldn't give a toss, and especially Newcastle, because the lads will turn up week after week. 2 years ago, we had the relegation battle on our hands. We were bottom of the league nearly all season. We just got
25,000.
The crowds went up. The crowds actually went up.
We in here last shine.
Then why do you do it?
Because you support the team. It's just like a ritual. You are attracted to it.
You're brought up that way, though. I mean, if your dad's a Newcastle fan, the first thing he does when you're born is throws a ball at your feet. It's just kick that about. And as time goes by, you grow up. When you're old enough, it takes you to the match, and it just hits from there.
You can't imagine life without Newcastle United.
For me, it's pointless being here. Go to watch Newcastle. Everything changes. When the match finishes at 25 on a Saturday, the next thing I think of, who do we play next? It's 3 o'clock next Saturday. That's the next thing I wait for.
Local newspapers rarely give offence. There's little mileage in crusading journalism. But when Newcastle's Evening Chronicle began to campaign for boardroom changes at the football club, the paper received overwhelming support. In a series of articles, sports editor John Gibson blamed Newcastle's directors for the club's decline. They were the common denominator through all the years of failure.
The players have changed regularly, the managers have changed regularly, but the board has remained basically the same, handed down from father to son. You see, for the 100 years that Newcastle have been in existence, it has been a family affair. Mr. McKeague, the current chairman, his father was chairman before that. Stan Seymour, the previous chairman, his father was chairman before that.
Now that's in just in one day.
Does anybody else wish to ask anything?
It has been a great thing of stature within the city to be a director of Newcastle. You've travelled first class anywhere in the world where Newcastle United have been playing. It has been their private little club, and they find it very, very difficult to accept that it can no longer be like that.
A lot of people say Newcastle's directors are only interested in keeping themselves in power.
Yes, well, people say so. I don't consider that that is so. And I have always been conscious of the fact that it is a democratically run club, unlike many, which are owned by an individual or individuals, and we are responsible to the shareholders.
We think it's wrong that a couple of hundred people, many of whom inherited shares and have little real interest in the club, should be able to determine what should happen to a major institution in the city and the region, and one which has a devoted following here and indeed all over the world.
Tynesiders had been given only one opportunity to buy into their favourite football club, and that was in March 1890, when 2,000 of these 10-shilling shares were hawked around the public houses in Heaton and Byker. So Newcastle United's capital base is only £1,000. Of course, most big clubs are undercapitalised. Like Newcastle, they go into debt by millions of pounds and yet resist the temptation to raise money through a major share issue to their fans. In soccer's boardrooms, democracy is something of a last resort.
The board has never set its mind against the possibility of a share issue at some stage. I'm not saying that it is something that is imminent, but we have not closed our minds to that possibility.
But you and your predecessors have had plenty of time to think about it. After all, the original share issue was almost 100 years ago.
Oh, because it hasn't been necessary.
I think if you're sitting in a seat and no one can get rid of you out of that seat because of the shares you hold and because of the family ties you have, then that is a bad thing for any business, not just for football business.
Getting rid of Newcastle's board only became a reality when John Hall arrived on the scene. What separates a business tycoon from the rest of us is his capacity for risk-taking. Coming from the pit village of Ashington, Hall has made a fortune out of gambling on property development, out of building his Metro Centre, the largest shopping complex in Europe, on an old ash tip in Gateshead. And now, with £50 million in his pocket, the coal miner's son can afford to live in what used to be the coal owner's stately home, Wynyard Hall. With his romantic view of the region, Hall was persuaded to launch a takeover bid for Newcastle United. It needed a new broom, and he was it.
This is the area of my roots, and I'm a provincial, and I believe passionately in my area, because so much is happening in the northeast now. Economically, we're going places, and I see the football club as the last piece in the jigsaw, as part of that regeneration, because, you know, there's so much support for it. You can get 30,000 gates now for a team that's bottom of the First Division, and for the past 30 years, there's been no real success at Newcastle United. That's a real indictment of what's been happening with the club, and that's the reason, in a sense, why I'm doing it. I don't want to own the football club. I want to give the people a share in the club. The pride and the passion of the people in this area for Newcastle United frightens me at times. And I say it's time that that pride and passion was given a say in the club.
A property developer had become the crowd's hero. He could take them over any time. But Newcastle's board was not so easily swayed. They didn't want Hall in their director's box.
I mean, what John Hall wants to do, he wants to build a good team. He wants to put a roof on the Leeds end, he wants to put a roof on the Gallagher end, develop the ground, use the facilities, buy players, and get them assets out on the park. It's what Liverpool do. Why can't we do it?
Newcastle are sinking fast with the directors they've got. And fair enough, they might sink with John Hall, but you might as well give them a crack, go down fighting.
Football directors are seldom popular, but at Newcastle things were getting out of hand. Whenever a goal was scored against their team, the crowd didn't blame the players or even the manager. It was the board's fault.
It is no fun being spat at, having one's car spat at. It's no fun to have people shouting abuse and seeing hatred in their faces. It's no fun seeing one's friends and one's relatives abused and shouted at. That's no fun at all. But you ask me why I don't walk away from it. I don't walk away from it because I've got a job to do. It's a job that I think that I'm doing well, given the difficult circumstances. It's a job which I think I can do a good deal better than John Hall could do.
Take yourself as the board, a board of directors. I'd like to look at this in a little detail, if we can, from our legal experts here. Suddenly, we've got a problem. We've got another group, David, you must be quite versed in this, coming in here basically to try and take over the company. They're buying the shares.
Possessing only 13% of the club shares, the Newcastle board appear to be vulnerable. To mount an attack on them, Hall formed the Magpie Group, a consortium of wealthy businessmen who pledged £5 million to the club, with a further £5 million coming from a major share issue to the fans. But takeover battles are not democratic. All that counts is the existing shares and who has got them.
They're not using the company, they're using it basically, they've gone to the bank and they've got their separate accounts.
There was now a clear division between the club's shareholders, anxious to cash in on the sudden interest in their previously worthless bits of paper, and most of the Newcastle fans who wanted Hall to succeed.
Your well-publicised takeover bid has turned you into a local hero. It must be very gratifying for you to hear the fans chanting Johnny Hall, Johnny Hall, Johnny Hall.
That's not the personality cult I'm after. It's, as I say, yes, I've become a figurehead because I'm from this region and I've made a lot of money, and people sort of put material gains as the success. But I'm not particularly enthusiastic for the chance.
Really?
No, I would rather not have that publicity.
Most of us would like that.
No, I have no aspiration to that. I've done everything I want to do in terms of my business life. I'm looking not for this aggrandizement, yes. I don't want it at all.
But you must recognize that putting money into a football club is rather like pouring water into a bucket that's got a hole in it.
Well, if you don't treat it as a business, yes, it will be. And I'm a businessman, and I'm looking at this from a business point of view, as well as looking to democratize the club. And I think that football clubs can be run as businesses in a proper manner, and will bring business efficiency to the club as when we take over. We're here, we're not going away. And we have sufficient capital behind us to ensure that eventually we will gain control of the club.
Right, okay. But we're going in... Well, we're offering 3. Now, we had to pay your aunt £1,000 more. Yes.
Working from Hall's offices, the Magpie Group contacted every shareholder they could find. First, they offered £500 a share, and the board matched it. Then £1,000. By December, Newcastle United shares were fetching £5,000, and both sides were buying them.
He's got it actually sitting in his little hand. He may think, I'll take it. You know, you might not be quite smiling as much as you would like, but it's pretty close.
Now, the other problem is that we won't be buying shares for that much longer. I mean, obviously, you can understand the situation where okay.
Well, admit that there are shares that are bought at more, but they tend to be in groups that are more attractive. As you'll appreciate, 1 is a fairly low number. Okay, right, fine, bye. Well, he wants a bloody fortune. He wants a fortune.
£1,000 for a 50p share. Now, £5,000. Aren't you running the risk, Mr. McKeague, that you will be wiped out financially? You'll not only be out of this boardroom, but you'll have such a huge bank overdraft that'll clean you out.
Oh, without wishing to talk about the financial situation in detail, I've got to accept that I have taken, personally, a very substantial financial commitment. And yes, I would not be being truthful with you if I didn't say that that was a concern. And I'm quite sure that Mr. Hall knows that very well.
We're doing very well. I don't know if you've seen the news, but we've actually bought George Dixon's shares, one of the directors in Newcastle United.
When the dust settled, Newcastle's board had a majority shareholding, and the Magpie Group could only win by making directors financial offers they couldn't refuse. With Dixon's defection came the scent of victory.
Believe me, we are going to win. With your share or without your share, we're going to win. As the game changes, we'll change our tactics.
São do clube, mesmo jogadores, em determinados momentos os jogadores não falam.
Newcastle's footballers were also changing their tactics. United's Brazilian striker Mirandina wanted to make it clear through an interpreter that he was in favour of sacking the board.
The great majority of the fans are against the board, and in fact, most of the players as well. The thing is, they don't speak up because they're frightened, you know, the players themselves, but that's what he thinks.
Are you hoping that the Magpie Group succeed in their takeover bid?
I hope so.
With abusive supporters, a split board, a galloping bank overdraft, and a players' revolt in the offing, Gordon McKeague soldiered on. To take some of the pressure off his back, he brought a new manager to St James's Park.
To welcome our new manager, we're very pleased to introduce to you Jim Smith.
Newcastle is such a big club and such a great opportunity to come and manage such a famous club. I had to take it and obviously gamble on my ability to keep us in the First Division. I know how much this football club means to the people of Newcastle and how much First Division status means. And so there's, you know, we just got to work very, very hard and give everything we've got to make sure that we do stay.
Come on!
Although he was football's most experienced manager, Jim Smith needed support, so he hired another tough northerner, Bobby Saxton. Before the game against Wimbledon, Newcastle hadn't scored for 6 matches and morale was at a low ebb.
Come on!
Mirandina couldn't get into the game, and Newcastle's defence hardly inspired confidence. Nerves were jangling on the field, while in the dugout nails were being bitten. Lessons learnt on the training pitch were not being carried out in practice.
Don't play sharp balls! Get the message, don't play short balls for the next 20 minutes! Brian! Brian! It's it up, Brian! Go short balls! Get it up, Brian!
Football is exasperating. It is much easier to play it from the touchline. But even the worst teams have their moments, and this was to be Newcastle's day.
Come on!
To the crowd's amazement, Newcastle scored twice and won the match. Gordon McKeague looked like a man who'd been reprieved on the gallows. Now there were grounds for hope. But behind the general euphoria lay a grim reality. Jim Smith knew he had a bad team, one that wasn't good enough to stay in the First Division. And the sands of time were running out.
I'm just thinking about the boy. Is he available? The lad I talked to you about last night?
In his first month at Newcastle, Smith was hardly off the phone.
Prepared to go to 350,000, really.
The bald eagle, as the press had dubbed him, was wheeling and dealing in the transfer market to turn a sow's ear into a silk purse.
Yeah, smashing. All right, then, I'll speak to you tomorrow, then. OK, mate. Cheers. All the best.
There were new faces on the field by the time Newcastle played Watford in the Cup, but would they do any better? With the fans still against them and their team propping up the First Division, Newcastle's directors needed a good cup run to save their sagging season. Smith's team certainly tried hard. They cut out the frills and played Watford at their own long ball game. It wasn't pretty to watch. For the Newcastle management, this was a rocky horror show. A grinding war of attrition in which United's lack of firepower was all too evident. All Newcastle got was a goalless draw and a replay at Watford. At least the Watford tie achieved a kind of epic grandeur. It went to 3 replays before a fluky own goal sealed Newcastle's fate. When your luck is out, it can be a cruel game.
You know, there's no magic wand that I can wave or me and Bobby Saxton can wave. We can obviously alter the personnel whenever we can, if we feel that place needs strengthening. But we've got to get out there on the training ground and work the principles of play that we like. And knowing that they've been proven successful over the years.
How much more money do you think you're going to have to spend in order to get the team up to scratch?
Well, I don't really know that. I mean, you ask transfer fees now, there's no way you can put any reasonable assumption that you're going to get him for 500 or £1 million, and that's why we're looking to the 2 Danish players who are coming over on trial, because their value for money is much better than value for money in the market at the moment.
So it's better to buy Danish?
Well, certainly in bacon terms, anyway.
Yes, and that's what you're saying.
Shortly afterwards, Frank Pingle signed for Newcastle. The Danish forward had always wanted to play in the English league.
Many money.
At Newcastle's training ground, the faces were constantly changing. By the transfer deadline, Smith had sold 8 players and bought 7, saving his employer £600,000, a policy designed to keep the bank happy. But it was Newcastle's bankruptcy on the pitch that was bothering the fans. A 2-0 home defeat against Charlton Athletic was the final straw. As the crowd streamed home, their mood turned nasty. 1,000 youths went on the rampage, and Newcastle's riot police had to be called out to quell the mob. If this was designed to intimidate the directors, it had the desired effect.
First item rising out of the minutes is the phase 2 of the...
At the next board meeting, Vice Chairman Ron Mackenzie resigned on grounds of ill health. He would sell his shares to John Hall and emigrate to Spain. The battle appeared to be over. Owing the bank almost £1 million for their recently acquired shares, some of Newcastle's wary directors wanted Hall to bail them out. What was he prepared to pay?
Hazarding a guess from what we know at this moment in time, without looking at the books, I think the club's worth between £3 and £4 million.
Is that the sum you're prepared to spend?
If it's necessary to go to that figure, I think we'll have to go to that figure.
Now, do you want to get your money back?
Of course, I don't want to own this football club. If I'd wanted to own this football club, I'd have done a takeover very, very early in the early stages.
How are you going to get the money back, then?
We'll have to issue new shares, as we always intended.
By the time you've been paid back out of a share issue, isn't there a very real danger that there won't be much capital left for ground improvements on new players?
That's
it's self-defeating,
isn't it? It is. That's the stage we're at now. Because we never intended, really, in the early days, to put money into the shareholders' pockets. Because they haven't put anything in the club. It's the fans who've kept this club going. And there's a danger now, basically, if people are wanting too much, put it that way, for the shares, that we are forced to pay more than basically we should give to them, then there could be very little to put back into the club.
But in all his calculations, Hall had underestimated the doggedness of Gordon McKeague. Deserted by colleagues, facing financial ruin, and under doctor's orders to avoid stress following a heart bypass operation, Newcastle's chairman had just begun to fight.
Gordon McKeague.
McKeague had no intention of doing a deal with Hall. The irresistible force had met the immovable object, and the popular press was caught in the middle.
Well, you know, I can't say that I appreciate being telephoned on a fine Sunday afternoon. We get few enough of them, and I'm busy in the garden.
There was to be no capitulation. Far from caving into financial pressure, to deal with his overdraft, McKeague sold family properties worth £500,000. The bank was appeased, and the board rejected Hall's takeover terms.
That action on Mr. Hall's behalf was considered by the board to be, frankly, an affront at that time.
But having blocked Hall's takeover bid, McKeague found himself up against an older adversary, the City Council, who owned St James's Park. Under the terms of this local authority lease, within 2 years, Newcastle is supposed to erect a new stand here at the Leazes end and to turn the Gallagher end into a covered cop. A massive redevelopment which could cost the club anything up to £12 million, money which it simply doesn't possess.
We have, of course, offered to act as honest brokers, if you will, between the present board and those who are seeking to become involved in the running of the club's affairs. I did this once before without any great success. I have offered to do so again, but that offer has been rejected by Mr. McKeague.
You mean you've offered to be an intermediary between Mr. McKeague and Mr. Hall?
That's right, either personally or through a small multi-party group of members of the authority, or indeed officers of the authority, in an effort to try and bring both sides together in the interest of the club. After all, millions of pounds have been spent on buying shares here, which should have gone into ground improvement.
If the club pleads poverty, as indeed it does, what should they do about it?
Well, issue shares, borrow long, and arrange revenue-raising investment in the ground.
I've always said that I don't rule out the possibility of a share issue.
I know you've always said it, but you haven't actually come to the point where you've had one.
No, because I haven't, the board hasn't decided that it's in the best interest at the present time for the club to do so.
To celebrate the Magpie Group's first anniversary, a dinner dance was held at Wynyard Hall.
Well, it's not so much for Newcastle United.
In this stately setting, the champion of democracy, of supporter participation in football, warmed to his egalitarian theme. Newcastle's directors had not heard the last of John Hall.
Maybe we've lost the battle, but I'll tell you this, we're going to win the war. Because our cause is just this tonight, the first anniversary, must say to you all and to the nation, we are not going away, and we intend to call an AGM on the question of the share issue, because that's the fundamental point. And I issue this challenge to the board. Are you afraid of real democracy? We aren't. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.
The football club's extraordinary general meeting could be Tyneside's fight of the century. John Hall believes he's fighting for Newcastle's fans. Gordon McKeag doesn't.
I don't like bullies, whether they are financial bullies or otherwise. I don't believe that it would be in the best interest of Newcastle United if Mr. Hall were to take control.
If it had been somebody else?
Oh, that would have been a very different matter.
Really?
Oh, yes. I could certainly imagine a consortium headed by somebody else with whom I would have been talking many months ago.
So it's not just a question of you keeping power for yourself?
No, certainly not. As far as I am concerned, power, if you like, to put it that way, at Newcastle United is a duty and a privilege rather than a pleasure.
There was little pleasure to be got out of watching United's match with Luton. To the anguish of the bench, the ball wouldn't go into the net or anywhere near it, and a goalless draw meant almost certain relegation.
The team hasn't been lucky, and a little bit of luck is necessary in football. Conventional wisdom is that over the course of a full season, the luck evens out, that the penalty decisions and the offside decisions, these even out over the course of a season. This year they haven't.
But perhaps you make your own luck in football. By selling their best players, Newcastle courted disaster. And as if to rub salt into the wound, a few days after the Luton match, Tyneside's former idols, Waddle, Beardsley and Gascoigne, combined to score 4 of England's 5 goals in a World Cup qualifier. Sport is about winners and losers. But as I see it, this Tyneside soccer story is mainly about losers. In the battle for power, Gordon McKeag has lost £500,000. John Hall has lost £2 million. The team has lost its first division status. And, for the time being, the fans have lost heart. The only winners are the Newcastle shareholders who've made windfall profits. But for the rest of this soccer-mad community, the season has been a tragedy.
Football results read by James Alexander Gordon. Barclays League Division 1. Charlton Athletic 1, Manchester United 0. Coventry City 0, Queen's Park Rangers 3. Derby County 1, Sheffield Wednesday 0. Middlesbrough 3, Nottingham Forest 4. Newcastle United 0, Luton Town 0. Norwich City 2, Aston Villa 2.